Karl Marx. Gentlemen, the repeal of the Corn Laws in England is the greatest triumph of free trade in the 19th century. In every country where manufacturers talk of free trade, they have in mind chiefly free trade in corn and raw materials in general. To impose protective duties on foreign corn is infamous. It is to speculate on the famine of peoples. Cheap food, high wages, this is the sole aim for which English free traders have spent millions, and their enthusiasm has already spread to their brethren on the continent. Generally speaking, those who wish for free trade desire it in order to alleviate the condition of the working class. But, strange to say, the people for whom cheap food is to be procured at all costs are very ungrateful. Cheap food is as ill-esteemed in England as cheap government is in France. The people see in these self-sacrificing gentlemen in Bowring, Bright and Company their worst enemies and the most shameless hypocrites. Everyone knows that in England the struggle between liberals and Democrats takes the name of the struggle between free traders and Chartists. Let us now see how the English free traders have proved to the people the good intentions that animate them. This is what they said to the factory workers. The duty leveled on corn is a tax upon wages. This tax you pay to the landlords, those medieval aristocrats. If your position is a wretched one, it is on account of the dearness of the immediate necessities of life. The workers in turn asked the manufacturers, "How is it that in the course of the last 30 years, while our industry has undergone the greatest development, our wages have fallen far more rapidly in proportion than the price of corn has gone up? The tax which you say we pay the landlords is about 3 pence a week per worker, and yet the wages of the handloom weaver fell between 1815 and 1843 from 28 pence per week to 5 pence, and the wages of the powerloom weavers between 1823 and 1843 from 20 pence per week to 8 pence. And during the whole of this period, that portion of the tax which we paid to the landlord has never exceeded 3 pence. And then in the year 1834, when bread was very cheap and business going on very well, what did you tell us? You said, if you are unfortunate, it is because you have too many children, and your marriages are more productive than your labor. These are the very words you spoke to us, and you set about making new poor laws and building workhouses, the Bastilles of the proletariat." To this the manufacturer replied, "You are right, worthy laborers. It is not the price of corn alone, but competition of the hands among themselves as well, which determined wages. But ponder well one thing, namely, that our soil consists only of rocks and sandbanks. You surely do not imagine that corn can be grown in flower pots. So if, instead of lavishing our capital and our labor upon a thoroughly sterile soil, we were to give up agriculture and devote ourselves exclusively to industry, all Europe would abandon its factories and England would form one huge factory town, with the whole of the rest of Europe for its countryside." While thus haranguing his own working men, the manufacturer is interrogated by the small trader, who says to him, "If we repeal the corn laws, we shall indeed ruin agriculture, but for all that, we shall not compel other nations to give up their own factories and buy from ours. What will the consequence be? I shall lose the customers that I have at present in the country, and the home trade will lose its market." The manufacturer, turning his back upon the workers, replies to the shopkeeper, "As to that, you leave it to us. Once rid of the duty on corn, we shall import cheaper corn from abroad. Then we shall reduce wages at the very time when they rise in the countries where we get our corn. Thus, in addition to the advantages which we already enjoy, we shall also have that of lower wages, and, with all these advantages, we shall easily force the continent to buy from us." But now the farmers and agricultural laborers join in the discussion. And what, pray, is to become of us? Are we going to pass a sentence of death upon agriculture from which we get our living? Are we to allow the soil to be torn from beneath our feet? To sum up, what is free trade? What is free trade under the present condition of society? It is freedom of capital. When you have overthrown the few national barriers which still restrict the progress of capital, you will merely have given it complete freedom of action. So long as you let the relation of wage labor to capital exist, it does not matter how favorable the conditions under which the exchange of commodities takes place. There will always be a class which will exploit and a class which will be exploited. It is really difficult to understand the claim of the free traders who imagine that the more advantageous application of capital will abolish the antagonism between industrial capitalists and wage workers. On the contrary, the only result will be that the antagonism of these two classes will stand out still more clearly. Let us assume for a moment that there are no more corn laws or national or local custom duties. In fact, that all the accidental circumstances which today the worker may take to be the cause of his miserable condition have entirely vanished, and you will have removed so many curtains that hide from his eyes his true enemy. He will see that capital become free will make him no less a slave than capital trammeled by customs duties. Gentlemen, do not allow yourselves to be deluded by the abstract word freedom. Whose freedom? It is not the freedom of one individual in relation to another, but the freedom of capital to crush the worker. Why should you desire to go on sanctioning free competition with this idea of freedom, when this freedom is only the product of a state of things based upon free competition? We have shown what sort of brotherhood free trade begets between the different classes of one and the same nation. The brotherhood which free trade would establish between the nations of the earth would hardly be more fraternal. To call cosmopolitan exploitation universal brotherhood is an idea that could only be engendered in the brain of the bourgeoisie. All the destructive phenomena which unlimited competition gives rise to within one country are reproduced in more gigantic proportions on the world market. For instance, we are told that free trade would create an international division of labor, and thereby give to each country the production which is most in harmony with its natural advantage. You believe, perhaps, gentlemen, that the production of coffee and sugar is the natural destiny of the West Indies. 2 centuries ago, nature, which does not trouble herself about commerce, had planted neither sugar cane nor coffee trees there. And it may be that in less than half a century you will find there neither coffee nor sugar, for the East Indies, by means of cheaper production, have already successfully combated his alleged natural destiny of the West Indies. And the West Indies, with their natural wealth, are already as heavy a burden for England as the weavers of Dhaka, who also were destined from the beginning of time to weave by hand. One other thing must never be forgotten, namely that just as everything has become a monopoly, there are also nowadays some branches of industry which dominate all others, and secure to the nations which most largely cultivate them the command of the world market. Thus, in international commerce, cotton alone has much greater commercial importance than all the other raw materials used in the manufacture of clothing put together. It is truly ridiculous to see the free traders stress the few specialties in each branch of industry, throwing them into the balance against the products used in everyday consumption and produced most cheaply in those countries in which manufacture is most highly developed. If the free traders cannot understand how one nation can grow rich at the expense of another, we need not wonder, since these same gentlemen also refuse to understand how within one country one class can enrich itself at the expense of another. Do not imagine, gentlemen, that in criticizing freedom of trade we have the least intention of defending the system of protection. One may declare oneself an enemy of the constitutional regime without declaring oneself a friend of the ancient regime. Moreover, The protectionist system is nothing but a means of establishing large-scale industry in any given country, that is to say, of making it dependent upon the world market, and from the moment that dependence upon the world market is established, there is already more or less dependence upon free trade. Besides this, the protective system helps to develop free trade competition within a country. Hence, we see that in countries where the bourgeoisie is beginning to make itself felt as a class, in Germany, for example, it makes great efforts to obtain protective duties. They serve the bourgeoisie as weapons against feudalism and absolute government, as a means for the concentration of its own powers and for the realization of free trade within the same country. But, in general, the protective system of our day is conservative, while the free trade system is destructive. It breaks up old nationalities and pushes the antagonism of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie to the extreme point. In a word, the free trade system hastens the social revolution. It is in this revolutionary sense alone, gentlemen, that I vote in favor of free trade.